Looks as though I'm live. Hello everybody, I'm Paul Ducklin from Sophos Naked Security, back for the first Naked Security Live talk of 2021. I know technically it's the second Friday of the new year. I was thinking of doing a Facebook Live video on New Year's Day, but I figured we could all have the day off and start today. And in the course of this week, if you've been reading Naked Security, you'll know that one of the most commented articles that we've had recently has been one that I wrote about Chromium, the Chromium browser project, which is finally, on New Year's Eve last year, decided that it was going to move towards using HTTPS, secure HTTP, the padlock in the address bar, by default, which no browser does yet by default. You have to take some special steps in order to force it to use secure HTTP all the time. Now that sounds like something, given that it's about security, that we should have done absolutely years ago, but from the comments, firstly there are some objections, which I want to go through, and there's also a little bit of misunderstanding still about what this whole idea of secure HTTP, HTTPS, the padlock in the address bar, what all of that means. So we'll start by looking at what HTTPS does do for you, what it does not do for you, and then we're going to go through, I've got 4 or 5 comments that I've pulled out from what people have asked, and reasons why they said, you know what, this is all a bit of a fuss about nothing, we don't really need secure HTTP everywhere, it's just going a little bit too far, it's too much, it's just Google, etc. throwing their weight around for no reason. But you probably know where I'm going with this, it's why I chose this particular t-shirt to wear today. The moral of the story is that if you're going to encrypt some things, you might as well encrypt everything, because then you don't have to worry about whether you forgot to encrypt things that you should have. In other words, it's like if you're going to drive and you're thinking, well, I'm only going to go a short distance, maybe I won't put my safety belt on. Well, if you just put it on routinely every time you get in the car, then you can never be caught out, no matter whether you're driving a short distance, a medium or a long distance, whether you're driving on roads you know well or ones you've never driven on before. Very, very similar on the internet. If you're going to take a security precaution that you can take everywhere, you might as well. So let's look at HTTPS. As you can see, the title says, do we really need it? You know what I'm going to say, yes, we do really need it, and I hope to explain to you in the next few minutes why. So for those of you who aren't exactly familiar with how it works, HTTPS uses a thing called TLS, Transport Layer Security. It's a network protocol that once you've made a connection, technically a TCP connection, across the internet, before you start exchanging data, you can use this TLS protocol to do a sort of cryptographic shimmy where the client and the server agree on a way of encrypting the traffic, what's called end-to-end. So as the data goes into your browser, as you type in something into a form, whatever, and click go, then the data gets encrypted before it leaves your browser. It's encrypted all the way along, and at the other end, when it reaches the server, and only when it reaches the server, the encryption gets stripped off. Now that doesn't mean that you can implicitly trust the server just because it's got security. What it means is, between your browser and the server at the other end, nobody who just happens to be listening in, whether it's your nosy neighbour who's got your Wi-Fi password, whether it's your ISP, whether it's someone sitting in the next seat in the coffee shop where you're using shared Wi-Fi, if you're living somewhere where you're still allowed to go to coffee shops, whether it's your ISP, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's the government, whether it's a cyber crook who's hacked any of the sites along the way, if you're encrypting end-to-end, at least you remove that uncertainty about who's looking at what I'm doing while I'm doing it. And that's the idea of TLS, the transport, the actual data you're sending back and forth. Whether that data is malware or not, whether that data is accurate or not, whether it's truthful or not, from end to end, it's being encrypted, and that is the purpose of HTTPS. However, there are a couple more things that it does. The certificate that is used by the server, typically, when you connect to it, will have been digitally signed by what's called a certificate authority, or CA. And that gives you at least a little bit of confidence that the person whose website you're connecting to was shown in some way to have control over that website. So it's not a very strong proof. It means if I hack into your website, then obviously I could get an HTTPS certificate in your name on your website without you realising. On the other hand, what it means is I can't just saunter up to a certificate authority and say, hey, I am Microsoft.com, give me a certificate. It's not going to work because I won't be able to prove that I am able to modify any content on the Microsoft.com website. So as well as encrypting the traffic, HTTPS does give you a little bit of confidence that you haven't just connected to some site that's been put up as an imposter. In other words, somebody set up a website, they've given it the same name as a well-known brand, and now they're passing themselves as off as that brand. So it gives you a little bit of protection against brand name hijacking as well. And thirdly, and in some ways perhaps most importantly, because encryption isn't just about secrecy and confidentiality, encryption technology, cryptography, also provides us with a way of doing integrity checking. Very importantly, it means that the data that comes back from the server, or the request that you send there in the first place, can't be tampered with along the way without you realising. Because if somebody can snoop on your traffic because it's unencrypted along the way, firstly, they could change the request that's going out. So they could change the amount that you want to pay, or they could fiddle with the bank account number that you're saying you want to pay it to. And worse still, on the way back, let's say you've gone to a news site, or you're looking up your bank balance, or you're going to see, did I submit my tax return or not? When the data came back, the same person who could have sniffed it on the way out could actually tamper with the reply. So what you see is not actually what the server meant to tell you. And that integrity checking in many cases is at least as important, possibly even more important than the actual privacy or the confidentiality of the data. So that's what HTTPS does for us. It doesn't guarantee that our browser hasn't been hacked. It doesn't guarantee that there's no malware on our computer. And it doesn't guarantee that the server has your best interests at heart. It just says that while you're communicating with the server, it's much more difficult than it otherwise would be for anyone along the way to snoop on what you're doing or to fiddle with what you're doing or the replies that you get. You can imagine that that's kind of really important, and that's why I say yes, we do need HTTPS, and insecure web browsing is a bad idea, and putting it to bed and getting rid of it forever is a fantastic idea. So I'm urging you, your New Year's resolution, if you run a web server and it doesn't support HTTPS yet, go out and get yourself an HTTPS certificate, whether you use a free service like Let's Encrypt, or you go to a certificate authority and ask them for help, or maybe if you're using a hosting provider, they'll be able to do it for you. So that's what HTTPS does for you, and that's why I think it's important. The flip side is that there are things that people think HTTPS does for them that it does not do, and that sometimes gives it a bad name. And most importantly, you still have people who think, well, it's a secure site. They have a certificate issued that proves that they control that website. Therefore, everything they put on that website, whoever it is, must be absolutely fine. Now, of course, that site could have been hacked independently of the encryption, and the hacked data, the malware-infected files, the fake news, the modified content, whatever it is, would then be correctly encrypted and sent back to you. So nobody would be able to snoop on you looking at, say, the fake news, but the certificate itself, the HTTPS connection, it doesn't validate the data on the server at the other end. That's the important thing to remember. So the easy way to think about that is HTTPS relies on this thing, as I said, called TLS, and that is transport layer security. It is not content validation security, fact-checking security, malware prevention security. Basically, it's just a way of keeping the eavesdroppers out. So that's the main thing that HTTPS doesn't do for you. It doesn't actually tell you that after you've made a secure connection, that the data that you get back is something you can implicitly and automatically trust. In the old days, to be honest, when comparatively few sites bothered to do HTTPS, and when it was comparatively expensive, there was that sense that an HTTPS site was more likely to have good, truthful, reliable content on it and less likely to have malware because the crooks weren't going to go through the hassle of getting HTTPS certificates. Of course, they're not, even if you're paying for them, then you get free ones as well. They're not that expensive. And as we know, one thing that cyber crooks seem to be rolling in these days, if you look at the scale of ransomware demands, is money. So yes, crooks can get HTTPS certificates. They can put them up on their website. So you still need to check the server name in the address bar. You still need to ask yourself, does it look like, do I feel like the site that I'm on is something that I should trust? The padlock itself is not a padlock that tells you about the site. It just tells you about the transport, the connection between your browser all the way through the coffee shop, the Wi-Fi access point, the ISP, all the other ISPs along the way, and into the network where the server is. So that's what HTTPS is for, and as I hope you can see, and as you get from the t-shirt, I think it's really important, and I'm not surprised that many years ago, Google and other search engines started figuring, you know what, if you have a server that doesn't do HTTPS, we're kind of going to mark you down a bit. So all things being equal, if you've got two servers giving roughly equivalent information or products that are about the same price, the one that's bothered to do HTTPS, we're going to put it higher up in the search rankings. Now, a lot of people didn't like that. They thought it's unfair. But I absolutely get the point, and I don't think that's a bad idea, because it is saying, you know what, we're going to try and encourage people to exchange data in a way that makes surveillance, eavesdropping, unauthorized modification, and those aspects of cyber criminality harder. So that's why I think it's a good idea. I want to go very quickly through 5 things, and these are comments if you go to nakedsecurity.sophos.com, or if you go to our Facebook page. You'll see that there's a vocal minority who say, no, this HTTPS, it's all a fuss about nothing. You know, it's kind of, it's a little bit like objection saying, I don't want to wear a seatbelt because it's kind of annoying, and if I have a huge crash, I'll probably be in trouble anyway. And, you know, most people don't die in car crashes, so why would I bother? And so that was, in fact, one of the first objections. Well, HTTPS, it doesn't stop you getting malware. If a crook's taken over your browser already, then they'll see everything before you send it to the site. They'll see the responses when it comes back. A crook with malware on your computer can just take screenshots and see what you're doing. So the overhead of doing all this extra encryption while the stuff's in transit, it kind of doesn't matter, because it's only an illusory protection. And that is a little bit like saying, you know what, I don't have to drive carefully when I'm on the road, because there are hundreds of other ways that accidents could befall me while I'm at home. So I've never quite understood that argument, but it's sort of saying HTTPS, it's not perfect, it can't fix all the problems, so let's not bother with it because it's kind of a hassle we don't need. I think it's really important because it does mean that it gives you more time to focus on protecting each end of the connection and worry a little bit less about who's snooping and who's looking at the data in between. The second argument, now this is probably the most compelling one, but fortunately it's not as serious as a problem as you might imagine. A lot of people are saying, well, I don't want to, I've been running my HTTP site for ages. We've had a few popular articles on there. You know, they've got, they're all over the place, and search engines like them, and other people have written articles that link to our site. And this was a few years ago, and we still get good traffic from those links. And those links have got http:// in them, because they're old links that we can't go back to them and force them to upgrade the link to say HTTPS. So we don't want to move our site over to HTTPS now because we were worried about losing all that search engine love and all that link love that we got years ago. Well, the good news is it's actually really easy to fix that problem. Because you could set up your server so that it still listens for HTTP requests, but when an HTTP request comes in, what you can do is all you need to send back is what's called an HTTP redirect that says, no, don't go to this URL, go to exactly the same URL, but say HTTPS instead. So when someone visits your site via HTTP on an old link, they'll make one insecure connection, and then your server will say, no, quickly redirect, now go to the secure connection, and so the connection will be upgraded. And having done that, once you've got all that working, you can send a special reply in your HTTPS responses called HSTS. It's HTTP Strict Transport Security. It's a special HTTP header, data header, that you send back in every request. It says, by the way, dear browser, whoever you are, next time you come to this site, I fully support HTTPS, don't bother with HTTP. And what that means is that anyone who clicks on one of those old links for one visit and one visit only, they will use HTTP insecurely, they'll upgrade to HTTPS, the browser will remember that your site's saying, do that again next time, and next time, even if the person clicks on an HTTP link, even if they type http:// deliberately into their browser, the browser will know that site doesn't do HTTP anymore, doesn't prefer it, so will automatically upgrade you. So that solves that problem. A well-run site, for example, if you just type into your browser nakedsecurity.sophos.com, you will find that you will not end up on an insecure naked security page. If you've been to the site before, you will go straight to the nakedsecurity.sophos.com secure page. If not, you'll get a sort of invisible redirect one time that takes you there. So that deals with the fact, I understand people are worried about losing breaking links that have worked well for them in the past. And nobody wants that to happen, but the technology exists to make sure that it doesn't. The third thing that we hear about, and this is an objection that we hear all the time, and it's it feels right, but let me explain to you why it's wrong. The argument goes, I've got a website, I'm running it for the public good, I'm putting up public information, bus times, library opening times, lists of simple facts, tide tables, for example. Now, those are a matter of objective fact, right? You calculate them from the phases of the moon, I believe. So you're saying I'm doing a public favour, I've got a public service, I've got public data. What's the purpose of encrypting it? Because it's not meant to be secret. Who cares about the confidentiality? Anybody who wants to know the tide times can figure them out for themselves. I'm just providing a table that has exactly the same data in. And that sounds like a compelling argument if you're giving data that's confidential, that is publicly available, so there's no need to keep it secret, because if anyone eavesdrops it, they're not getting information they couldn't get otherwise. The thing is that for cases like that, you are not doing HTTPS to secure the data in the transaction, but to secure the transaction itself, so that anybody who browses to your site can still enjoy the privacy to choose when they browse, what they read, when they read it, and so forth. The classic example is, you might imagine that the opening times of your local methadone clinic, for example, those are a matter of public record. You can probably go to the door and look, and they'll be printed there. But the fact that somebody chooses one night to visit that site, to find out about the clinic, to find the opening times, which are public, the fact that they chose to look up that information, clearly they have an absolute right to privacy in looking that up. It shouldn't be anyone else's business what they do, even if it's not something, you know, that relates exactly to your personal life or to personal information. Crooks who learn about your habits, about your culture, about your friends, about your interests, about the things you like to buy, about the things you like to look at online, even if they feel completely non-controversial, even if they're all perfectly legal and perfectly middle of the road, stitching all that stuff together can give crooks an enormous amount of information about you that could assist in them automatically acquiring information that helps with information theft, with identity theft. So HTTPS, it isn't just about securing the data because the data is confidential. It's about keeping the fact that you chose to have a conversation with this server at that time confidential too. And, you know, and keeping, obviously, someone sniffing your network traffic could see that you connected to that particular server. But if they can find out even a few things about what you were interested in, and a few pages that you visited in sequence, and the websites that you chose to go to after you looked up the time that the methadone clinic opened, if they can piece all that together, you can imagine that they can get an awful lot of information they do not deserve and should not have about you. So in many ways, the reason you're putting HTTPS on a website that publishes already public information is not to keep the information secure. It's actually for the benefit of the privacy and, if you like, the individuality, the decency of the people who are browsing to your site. And the last objection, I'll just keep it to 4, that we saw, now you also hear this a lot, is it's too slow. Obviously, if you're going to connect from a client to a server and all you have to do is say, send me this web page, and the server says, okay, here it is, that's one round trip. So if you're 50 milliseconds network away, 50 milliseconds there, 50 milliseconds back, job done, 100 milliseconds round trip time finished. But if you first have to do a little cryptographic dance where you're exchanging packets to agree an encryption key and check the certificate and all that stuff, and only then can you start exchanging packets, then if all you wanted to do was look up what sunrise time tomorrow, which is a few bytes of data, if you have to do that whole cryptographic dance first every time, indeed, HTTPS TLS is slower because there is a setup time. However, if you're providing a service where your customers can come and acquire information where the fact of the conversation really ought to be encrypted, then if HTTPS can't be made fast enough for you, maybe you need to find another way to disseminate that information. Or you need to look at some of the extensions that exist for the latest version of TLS, TLS 1.3. There are techniques where you can actually start exchanging data while you're agreeing with the keys. You can cut out this, you can make this cryptographic dance that you do at the beginning very much shorter. And another trick you can do is you can ask your customers to make long-running connections so they connect up front. It's like making a telephone call and then keeping the phone off the hook and keeping the line open so that when they want to communicate in future, they don't have that setup time. So yes, HTTPS is a little bit slower because there's a little bit more work to do. But if you think of the average computer power, think how many calls, how many CPU calls are probably in your laptop while you're sitting there browsing, and like you're not going to type that fast, you know, compared to the time of setting up, say, a browsing connection. So I think the argument, oh, it's too slow. If you think it's too slow, really what you're saying is, I'm not prepared to put in the work to make this fast enough with the encryption to suit my customers. I'm asking them to take a security or a privacy risk for my own programming convenience, and maybe you need to think about things the other way around. So that's enough for this week, folks. I hope you now have a slightly better understanding of what HTTPS is, and most importantly, what it will not do for you. And like I said, if you do have a web server, I know it's a little bit of a hassle to go and get a certificate, an HTTPS certificate. You may feel that for the kind of data you're serving up, you know, it could be knitting patterns, it could be, you know, a meeting of the running club for next week or whatever. It may not feel as though that there's much to hide in there, but the truth is that if, as lots of people say, you've got nothing to hide, then there's no reason why anyone else should find out about that. It's not important enough for anyone else to find out about, and you have every right to assume that they will not be able to do so. If you do have an HTTP server and you don't have a TLS certificate yet, please look at how to get one. You could either go to somewhere like Let's Encrypt, which will do certificates fairly easily for free. There's a little bit of technical fiddling, but there's software that can help you do that, renews them automatically. Or if you use a hosting provider, go and talk to them, because most of them will magically make TLS work for you now if you want. You might have to pay a little bit more, you might not, it depends on the service you've got. But really, as far as your visitors, as far as your readers, as far as your customers are concerned, I think it's well worth it. So thanks for listening, everybody, and until next week, stay secure.